Huh?
You are standing in line at the store. Your phone is in your pocket. 30 seconds pass. Your thumb is already moving toward it before you decide to check anything at all. Nothing is wrong. Nothing needs your attention. You just felt something, a small itch behind your eyes, and your hand answered before your brain finished asking the question. What was that feeling exactly? Where did it come from? And why does it feel almost unbearable to sit still with nothing happening? Most people assume ancient humans never had this problem. Survival was supposedly too demanding. Every hour was hunting, gathering, running from something with teeth. There was no time left over for the mind to wander, and certainly no time to feel bored. That assumption feels obvious. It is also wrong. In the 1960s, an anthropologist named Marshall Sahlins looked closely at hunter-gatherer societies still living outside industrial economies. He expected to find people working constantly just to stay alive. Instead, he found something almost embarrassing for modern civilization. Many hunter-gatherer groups spent only a few hours a day acquiring food. The rest of the day was open. Sahlins called this the original affluent society, not because people had many possessions, but because they had an abundance of something modern people chronically lack: time. So the question shifts. If ancient humans had hours of unstructured time every single day, what did they do with it? They could not scroll. They could not stream a show. They sat by a fire, or under a tree, or beside a river, with nothing scheduled and nothing required. That should have been agonizing if boredom works the way people assume it does. But something does not add up because the archaeological and anthropological record does not show people falling apart from empty time. It shows something else entirely. An anthropologist named Polly Wiessner spent years recording conversations among the Juhuansi people of the Kalahari Desert, one of the last groups with a long history of hunting and gathering. She noticed a pattern nobody had measured carefully before. During the day, conversations were mostly practical. Complaints, negotiations, small disputes over food or work. But at night, once the fire was lit, the entire tone of the group changed. People stopped talking about logistics. They started telling stories, myths about ancestors, jokes, tales about distant relatives and legendary hunts. Wiessner found that firelight did not just light the camp, it seemed to switch on a completely different mode of the human mind, one built for imagination rather than survival. That is strange if you sit with it for a second. Why would evolution build a special mental gear that only activates once the practical work of the day is finished? A gear for stories, for myth, for laughter that serves no immediate use. Unless that gear is not actually useless. Unless empty time was never really empty at all. Here's where the picture gets more interesting. Boredom itself, the specific uncomfortable feeling of having nothing to do, is not simply an absence of activity. Psychologist John Eastwood, who studies boredom at York University, describes it as a signal, not a void. In his framework, boredom is the mind's way of saying your current situation is not using your attention properly. It is not punishment for idleness. It is a nudge towards something else. Something more engaging, more social, more useful to the group or to you. That reframes the entire question. Ancient humans sitting by a fire were not suffering through dead time while waiting for the next hunt. Their minds were being pushed, gently but constantly, toward exactly the kind of activity that built human culture: storytelling, teaching children through myth, practicing tools by hand even when no urgent task required it. The itch of boredom may have been the same itch you feel reaching for your phone, except 40,000 years ago it pointed toward a person, a story, or a half-finished spear instead of a screen. This still leaves an uncomfortable puzzle. If boredom evolved to redirect people toward useful connective activity, why does it now feel so unbearable that people will do almost anything to avoid it, including things that are mildly unpleasant? In 2014, psychologist Timothy Wilson and his colleagues, including Aaron Westgate, ran an experiment that became famous for a very odd reason. They placed people alone in a room for 15 minutes with nothing to do except think. No phone, no book, just their own mind. Many participants found it genuinely difficult. Then the researchers gave some of them an option. They could press a button and receive a mild electric shock, the same shock they had already said before the experiment that they would pay money to avoid. A significant number of people chose to shock themselves rather than sit alone with their thoughts for a few uninterrupted minutes. That result unsettled a lot of people when it was published, and it still does. It suggests that unstructured time, once purely available, has become something the modern brain treats almost like a threat. But notice what is missing from that experiment. No fire, no group, no story being told nearby. Just one person, isolated in a small room, disconnected from every social cue that ancient boredom evolved to respond to. Maybe the shock button was not proof that boredom is unbearable. Maybe it was proof that boredom without other people is a completely different experience than the boredom your ancestors actually lived through. This is where the story takes its clearest turn. For most of human history, empty time was almost never solitary. If you had nothing to do, you were usually sitting near other people who also had nothing urgent to do. Boredom was a shared condition, not a private one. And shared boredom has a name that historians and anthropologists use quite often. It is called leisure, and leisure is where an enormous amount of human culture was actually built. Songs, games, riddles, the entire oral tradition that carried knowledge across generations before writing existed. None of it came from busy, task-filled hours. It came from the in-between hours, the ones with nothing scheduled. Psychologist Sandy Mann, who has spent years studying boredom at the University of Central Lancashire, found something that supports this idea from a completely different angle. In her experiments, people who were bored before doing a creative task consistently generated more original ideas afterward than people who went straight into the task without a boring period first. Boredom in her data was not wasted time. It was incubation time. The mind, once freed from immediate demands, starts wandering into unused corners, and some of those corners contain genuinely new ideas. Put these threads together and a very different picture of prehistoric boredom emerges. It was not empty. It was not agonizing in the way modern isolated boredom can feel. It was communal, story-shaped, and quietly productive. Functioning almost like a workshop the mind entered once the pressing business of the day was done. The discomfort of having nothing to do was real, but it was aimed outward, toward other people and toward invention, not inward toward a screen that could deliver an instant, isolated hit of stimulation. Which raises the real question hiding underneath all of this. If boredom evolved as a nudge toward connection and creativity, why does modern life so often let that nudge dead end at a phone? The answer has less to do with boredom being broken, and more to do with what boredom now has easy access to. Ancient boredom had two available outlets most of the time: a person nearby, or your own imagination. Modern boredom has a third outlet that did not exist for nearly the entire span of human evolution: an object in your pocket that can deliver social contact, novelty, and stimulation instantly without requiring you to build anything, tell anything, or wait for anything. Your brain still runs the old program. It still treats the itch of boredom exactly the way it always has, as an urgent signal demanding redirection. It simply has not adapted to a world where the fastest redirection available is a feed engineered to never truly satisfy that signal. Ancient boredom pushed people toward stories that ended, games that resolved, conversations that reached a natural close. Modern boredom often gets rerouted into something with no ending built into it at all, which is part of why it can feel less like relief and more like a mild, low-grade hunger that never quite goes away. There is something almost funny about this, in the way your brain still treats a skipped lunch like the edge of a famine. Here your brain treats 30 empty seconds like an emergency requiring immediate intervention, even though nothing in that moment is remotely urgent. The mismatch is not a flaw in you personally. It is a very old alarm system going off in a very new building. None of this means boredom should be eliminated or feared. If anything, the research points the opposite direction. Wiessner's firelight conversations, Eastwood's model of boredom as a redirect signal, Mann's findings on incubation and creativity, all of them suggest that unstructured time is doing exactly the job it evolved to do, as long as it is allowed to run its course. The discomfort is not the problem. The problem is reaching for the fastest possible escape before the discomfort has a chance to point you anywhere interesting. So return to that line at the store, your thumb hovering near your pocket. That itch is not new, and it is not a malfunction. It is the same signal a person felt sitting by a fire 40,000 years ago, waiting for someone else to speak first, waiting for a story to begin, waiting for their own mind to wander somewhere worth going. The only thing that has changed is what sits closest at hand when the signal fires. Ancient humans, bored out of their minds by any modern definition, were not suffering through empty time. They were, in a very real sense, exactly where evolution needed them to be. One unfilled moment away from the next story, the next idea, the next person worth turning toward.